The story happened when I was 12 years old. I was visiting my dad's stepmom and my little sister in a small city in British Columbia, Canada. My dad's house was small with a very large yard and surrounded by dense forest. Neighbors were very spread out. It was a beautiful area, and I had always looked forward to the summertime whenever I would get to spend a couple of weeks there. We had spent the day at a local fair just over an hour out of town, and we returned home late in the afternoon. Once we got home, I had made myself comfortable in the living room watching TV. My dad and stepmom were hanging out in the bedroom, and my 3-year-old sister was playing in her room. All of us just decompressing after a very busy day. Now, this isn't exactly an area where you expect anything creepy to happen. The worst thing you would see here is maybe a black bear in the yard. Never in my time there did we have an unexpected visitor. Neighbors generally kept to themselves. It was always quiet and very peaceful. However, this day was very different. As I sat in the living room watching TV, I heard a very light knock at the front door, almost like a tapping sound. I was very confused at first, and I'd wondered to myself if I had just heard it on the TV. I paused the TV and listened again, and I once again heard this very light knock coming from the front door. The front door had a large glass panel so you could very easily see somebody outside without looking through the peephole. This also meant that it was very easy for others to see inside as well. Nobody else in the house had heard the noise but me, and I had let my curiosity get the best of me. I walked out of the living room and around the corridor to where I could see the front door across the kitchen. What I saw still gives me nightmares to this day. There was a disheveled woman outside peering through the glass. Her face was covered in scabs, and she had blood pouring down her face. I was frozen as I had just locked eyes with this woman. She had a look of pure fear on her face, and she had mouthed the words "help" through the glass. I may have only been 12 years old at the time, but I was raised smart enough to know to never answer the door to strangers. I motioned to her with one finger, telling her to hold on a second, and then I went to my dad's room. I explained him the situation, and he had told me to stay put in the bedroom with my stepmom. He then fetched my sister and brought her into the room with us. We sat silently as my dad went outside to go speak with the woman. We couldn't really hear from inside, but I was terrified. Was this a trap? Was she planning to break in? Were there others outside? This was all rushing through my mind, and yet my stepmom, the angel she is, kept me calm and assured me that nothing bad was going to happen to us. As we sat in the quiet room, we had heard what sounded like a diesel truck speeding down the road beyond the trees. This wasn't unusual at first, until we heard it loop back and then speed past our house yet again. This continued a few times, and then silence again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, my dad returned to the room to let us know what had happened. The woman was very clearly an addict, and she had been with her boyfriend in his truck. He didn't get into specifics, but he had began beating her in his truck. After seeing what she looked like at the door, it all made sense. She was beaten badly, but she was able to escape and run into the trees, eventually finding our house. She knocked quietly as she knew that he was out looking for her, and she had tried to remain as silent as possible. My dad brought her around into the backyard, as he didn't want to bring her in the house with us while she explained the situation to him. The truck we heard speeding by numerous times was the boyfriend looking for her up and down the street. Thankfully, my dad had gotten her into the backyard, which was surrounded by trees and high fences that he wouldn't be able to see through. She refused to get the police involved, so my dad instead called her a cab and took care of the fear for her to get her somewhere safe. This was all 15 years ago, and I've always wanted to ask my dad more about this story, but a part of me just really wants to forget that it happened. I'm sure you've all heard scarier stories than this, but I'll never forget when I first locked eyes with that woman through the door. Blood dripping down her scabbed face, hair wet with blood, begging for me to help. As I look back on it now, I just really pray that woman was able to get the help she needed, and also escape that asshole boyfriend of hers that beat her. I hope that she was able to fight through her demons and start fresh somewhere away from that psycho. This story isn't mine, but something that happened to someone I was classmates with. This incident happened a few years ago when I was in college pursuing my master's. There was this group of friends, 3 boys and a girl, and they were quite close. We actually had a common class in the previous semester, and that's how I knew of them. I don't think I've ever talked to the guys, but the girl who I'll call Lizzie was really friendly, and we did exchange smiles occasionally. On this particular day, after the classes at about 5, the group drove in their car to a nearby store. The store was like a 5-minute drive from college. There was also a cafe nearby and a food truck too, so it was a common hangout spot for college kids. The boy who was driving had parked the car on the roadside, and then the boys got out to grab something really quickly. Lizzie, due to some reason, chose to not get out of the car, as the boys might have said they were going to make it short and quick. Lizzie just sat in the back seat scrolling on her phone. She was quite oblivious to her surroundings and focusing on the phone, when all of a sudden she had heard the car's engine then start and then slowly move. She looked ahead of her, and it wasn't her friend. It was a complete stranger. Maybe that's when she started to panic and then scream her lungs out. Her friends and other people also noticed, so they too started screaming for the man to stop the car. One of Lizzie's friends even chased after them, but the driver just increased the speed and started driving recklessly on the highway. Lizzie tried to open the doors and windows, but the guy had instantly locked it as soon as he entered. So she tried kicking his seat and hitting him, but he just pushed her to the back. He was a 6 feet tall, well-built guy. She then realized that she had the phone, so she quickly tried calling the police, but he had snatched her phone and then threw it near his feet. She might have tried screaming and even begging for him to let her to get out, but he didn't. When they entered a secluded road, she had kind of lost hope of getting out alive. Just then, she had saw flashing lights behind her, tailing the car. The man tried to drive faster now to lose them, but the patrol vehicle managed to overtake the car and bring it to a halt. As soon as the car came to a stop, the driver tried running away, but he was caught. The police helped Lizzie out of the car, and she was in shock and trembling with fear. She didn't know what evil intentions this man had for trying to kidnap her. Fortunately, while they were on the highway speeding away, a traffic cop had seen the car driving recklessly, and he had noticed a woman inside it hitting the window. He had a gut feeling that there was someone in trouble, so very quickly he had called a patrol vehicle in the vicinity to then tail the car. Their quick action saved Lizzie. As to how the car was stolen, Lizzie's friend who drove that car had forgotten to lock the car door and also remove the keys. Maybe they thought they would be quick. The police interrogated the man, and he said that he didn't realize that someone was in the back seat, and that his initial plan was to just steal the car, but when he saw the girl, he thought about deserting her at a secluded place. This is hard to believe, but that was his version, and I don't know if he was lying or just later confessed the truth, but surely he didn't plan to just leave her at a secluded place. If he had planned to let her out, he might have done it beforehand. Fortunately, she was saved, but the fact that she was kidnapped in daylight at a public spot is just shocking. One of my friends was also at that spot when this incident occurred. Everyone just seemed so shocked and in distress. The trauma of escaping her kidnapping had kind of taken a toll on Lizzie, who I never saw after the incident. I got to know from her classmates that she had decided to go back to her hometown and then only come back for exams. The boys did stick around, but they definitely weren't their usual selves, cracking jokes, laughing hysterically and all, and they often seemed quiet and distant, like they had missed their friend and kind of blamed themselves for it. We never got to know what else happened with the man, but I had read an article in a newspaper covering the story that he had actually previously been arrested for stealing various objects and also robbing a house. So when he saw the new car, he might have just decided to steal it right then and there. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but it could have been worse if the guy hadn't been arrested. Approximately 1990, my daughter was around 4 years old. I remember being very tired one day after I had put her down in her room for her afternoon nap, and I had laid down in my room across the hall as well, which I rarely did. I apparently fell fast asleep, and when I woke up, it was 3 in the morning. My daughter slept all the way through as well and was still asleep. Next, I realized that I had woken up to the front doorbell that was ringing. Someone was aggressively pushing it numerous times. I could hear my 45-pound border collie going crazy at the front door with her loud bark, snarling and continually jumping off the door. Fear set in immediately when I could hear how upset she was, and then realized that I still had all of the blinds open since it was still daylight when we fell asleep. I thought if I started turning on lights and going to the windows to close the blinds, they could see me. I was frozen in fear, not sure what to do. I couldn't make myself go near the windows to turn on outside lights for fear of seeing someone looking back at me since I didn't know what was going on. Nothing good, that's for sure. I had called my next door neighbors to see if they could see anything out there, and he told me when I called that he had turned on his floodlight and that he had just seen 2 men ducking around my privacy fence in the back, trying to get out of sight. I could then hear their footsteps on the back deck, and I remembered that the blinds at the sliding glass door in the back were still open, and not remembering for sure if the door was even locked. The neighbor then bravely told me on the phone that he was going to go out there with his tire iron to then confront them, and then his wife would call the police. Through all of this, thankfully my daughter stayed asleep. I did have a gun, and I thought about getting it and waiting at the end of the hallway with it if they actually got inside. As scared as I was, I knew there was no way anyone was getting into my daughter's room, only over my dead body. After nervously waiting, my neighbor came and told me that they had left after he went and talked to them. He said by the time he got out there, they were in front again, sitting on my retaining wall, no car in sight. He asked what they were doing, and they actually told him that they were looking for their dog. Yeah, right. He told me that he didn't believe them, and he also noticed that they didn't even have flashlights. Plus, why target my house? He told them that the police were on their way and to get the hell out of there, and they decided to leave and just took off walking. The police didn't show up until after they were gone, but they said they would patrol the area. I asked my neighbor what they looked like. After hearing their descriptions, my heart sank. I realized they were the same young men that had followed me home 2 days ago. No question. I had gone to the video store a few blocks away with my daughter, and they must have seen us then. I had my car for sale, and I had placed a for sale sign in the back window. I didn't notice them until we were almost back home, and they signaled they were interested in the car, and I didn't think much about it when they pulled behind me in the driveway. They looked like normal young guys, seemed sincerely interested in the car, and they said they would get back with me. I still wonder what exactly they wanted and what their agenda was that night. Were they planning on stealing the car, or had they decided to do something to me or my daughter personally, or both? They were obviously trying to break in, so I wondered what their plan was to deal with my very angry dog on the other side of that door. I wish the police could have shown up when they were still there, so that maybe I could have gotten some answers. Please think before you might drive a car around with a for sale sign in the window. I never really realized it would give the creeps out there an excuse to interact with you. Trust no one. Almost 20 years ago, I was a single mom with an only daughter who was in her last year of high school, age 17. We lived in a small house, no garage, in a small town that was thought of as a fairly safe area. When my daughter got home from school, she would walk our dog around on the neighborhood sidewalks. I didn't get off work until a few hours past the time she got home. While I didn't like her having to be a latchkey kid, we tried to make it work. One day I noticed a note folded up under a rock and placed on our front wall. It was a strange note from my daughter, saying that this person lived close and gave clues, but didn't say where or who he was. My thoughts were that this neighbor apparently saw her walking the dog and figured out where she lived. Among other things, the note stated that he wanted a girlfriend, and he had decided that she's the one. Also, some random questions for her about what she wanted to do on their assumed upcoming date. Immediately, I had a sinking gut feeling as I could tell that the person writing this note wasn't exactly normal. We finally figured out which neighbor it was, and it turned out to be a boy that went to her school 1 grade below her age, around 16 to 17. He lived across the street, just 2 houses down. We discussed it, and she conveyed that she was not the least bit interested in him. And I expressed my concerns to her that he was way too assertive with his notes and that his behavior was odd. She said that he thankfully never said anything at all to her at school. We decided the direct approach was best, and we would both call and say that she already had a boyfriend, so that he would hopefully move on and maybe not be too offended about the rejection. I found their number and we got on the phone together and then called. We asked for him, but his mother said he wasn't there. As nicely as we could, we introduced ourselves and we told her about the note, and we told her our story about how my daughter already had a boyfriend. I could tell that the mother found it somewhat cute that he approached her in this way. Bob promised that she would give him the message and tell him that she already had a boyfriend and that she wasn't available. After this, I was hopeful he would quietly go away, but no. I remember not liking it at all that my daughter was there alone when I was still at work, when she was obviously being noticed by this guy just a few doors down. I also knew that he could tell when I wasn't home, since there was no garage and my car wasn't in the driveway. Also, he went to the same school as her, so he knew the times and schedules, and he could easily figure out that she was alone after school, and that she sometimes got rides home and sometimes walked home. Another week or so passed, and I came home and found yet another note left on our small retaining wall with a rock on top, just like before. It was to my daughter from the same guy, claiming yet again that he had decided to date her and then declared her as his new girlfriend. This time red flags were waving, and creepiness was setting in as the notes were getting more and more progressive. I went down to their house that evening, and the father actually answered the door. I told him about the note and showed it to him. At first, he just slightly laughed and mumbled something about boys and their hormones. Then I informed him that this was the second note left after we already had spoke to his wife, and then explained again that my daughter was not available to date. His tone then changed to a more serious note, and he said he would speak to his son regarding the situation. I then thanked him and left. Something I had noticed when I was on his porch talking. I noticed what appeared to be a son passing us and walking around to the front of the house and then out onto the street in the dark with his hoodie up, and without saying a word, and then just continued walking down the street. It seemed strange to me that the father didn't bring him into the conversation, or at least introduce him to me, or at least anything, since the conversation pertained to him. I tried to get my hours changed at work, but I wasn't able to. I warned my daughter to be on the lookout and to always keep the doors locked. I had asked her to just let out our dog in the backyard when she got home, and to wait to walk her until after I got home so I could go with her. I felt very uneasy about her being there alone with this strange acting guy being so close. I had her call me as soon as she got home from school every day, just to let me know that things were okay, and I always raced home as soon as possible after work. Now, my daughter actually found the situation somewhat humorous, laughing and calling him her stalker while telling me, "Don't worry, Mom, I think I can take him," since he wasn't really a huge guy. She was just being a very naive teenager by not taking it too seriously, but she did follow the instructions that I gave her. During this time, we had put our house up for sale, and we had found another one to purchase. I remember thinking that it could not come at a better time, as I just wanted to get my daughter away from this situation. He never did bother her at school, which was odd, but before we moved, there was yet another note for her left like the other ones, and I got very nervous about how bold and defiant this guy was after already speaking to both parents. Obviously, they weren't going to do anything about it and had no control over him. It seemed like he was not going to give up on this, and I really worried that things would soon escalate beyond leaving notes. Well, we finally got moved, and I was so grateful that this weird-acting guy would have no idea where we moved to. Even though it wasn't the same school district, it was in a whole different neighborhood. My daughter then graduated and the situation finally ceased. I was so relieved. So, about 2 years later, there was big news from the same small town that we had lived in previously. A manager at a local retail store had been murdered, and they were looking for the suspects. The poor lady had been brutally murdered right inside the store after hours. Things like this never happen in this small town, so it was definitely the talk of the town. Months later, they had finally arrested 2 men for the murder, and I was shocked to find out one of them was the same one that used to bother my daughter with his nose. Apparently, he and his friend had tried to rob the store and decided to leave no witnesses. I can't help thinking what he would have been capable of after it finally dawned on him that he was being rejected by someone who he had already decided was going to be his new girlfriend. My daughter was shocked when she found out it was him. She had always just thought of him as some backward kid that went to her school. It gave us chills. He and his friend are now behind bars. Please remember to trust no one and always follow your gut feeling.